scars make it hurt.
Welcome to Willing to Learn, Dr. Van Lack. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, today we are going to be discussing your published piece in 2018 in Journal of Urban Education, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, an autoethnographic journey on doing participatory action research as a graduate student. And actually, I don't think I've even told you this myself, but there was a piece that I co authored with two other scholars, and we use this text as an exemplar, almost like a model of
Yeah.
of a way to think of how we can look at our own stories
Mhm.
and reflect on that and and be able to write. And we found much inspiration from this piece. So before
Oh,
we
that's
get
cool.
yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that. Like, I think as a scholar, you write and you
Yes.
publish and you send out to universe, and you just don't know how it impacts people. So,
No, yeah, I know. I wish I should have. It's like one of those things too when you start meeting someone, you don't want to come across as like super fangirl or like, by the way, I've really read this piece. Like, I've really read them a lot because I like the organization and the structure. You're like, okay, let me warm up. Let me not scare her off quite yet, right?
I've definitely had fangirl moments with
Yes.
senior scholars, so I get it.
But before we get into the paper, which I'm really excited to talk about, if you don't mind just sharing with our listeners a little bit about who you are and what led you to doing this type of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where do I begin? So, I'm currently at the University of Illinois Chicago as an associate professor. Previously, I was at an institution in Texas. And before that, I was getting my PhD at Wisconsin. And before that, I was a high school English teacher in Richmond, California for 8 years. And I think for myself, I grew up in Oakland, California, attended K 12 public schools, and really experienced firsthand what educational inequities looks like. And so for me, being able to do this work as a professor and a scholar is a an honor, but also a social responsibility that I have and I feel. And so I'm just happy to hear that, my work can actually be impactful. So thank you.
Of course. Was there, I mean, obviously, when we start graduate school, some are very focused and they know exactly what they want to study. Some will take time, they go down different paths, they change, they pivot. I was curious how selecting your research agenda, how did that come about? Why did this become important to you to pursue not only in your master's but also as a doctorate and then now as a tenure faculty?
Yeah, so I think I have a very interesting story in the sense that I actually applied to 10 different graduate programs and I got accepted to one, and that happened to be Wisconsin. And
Wow.
then when I started at Wisconsin, I actually thought I wanted to study charter schools because that was the context that I worked in, but I didn't, like, I wasn't passionate about it. I wasn't like feeling it in the way that I probably should. And so I really spent the first 2 years of my graduate studies really just reading a lot. And it was during this time that I stumbled across like the art of critical pedagogy and also revolutionizing education. And when I read those books, I was like, "What? It's possible to do research with and alongside young people?" Because that's one of those things that I really missed about being a graduate student was that as a graduate student, I was removed from the classroom for the first time in like 8 years, and so I missed that connection with young people, and so when I found out and discovered what YPAR was, I was like, "This is awesome." So that really was like the doing that reading and really, engaging in that work, and I was like, "This is my jam," and I advise my students a lot, my, doc students, that when you're trying to find your topic, like, y this is something that you're gonna be in it for, like, a while, right? So, you wanna make sure that it's a topic that you, like, truly love. So,
That's great. So you found these books. What about any mentors in particular? Did you have opportunities to work with anyone in your graduate studies that helped shape or influence your direction?
yeah, I mean, so I happened to work with John Diamond, who was at Wisconsin at the time, and he was connected with Urban, which stands for, I think, Urban Researchers Research Based something network. I'm sorry, Urban, I don't remember the exact. Anyway, so and through my work with John, like I was helping to support some urban conferences, and it was at this conference that like I met Michelle Fine, Ben Kirshner, Mark Warren, like all these like seminal scholars that do community-based research. And so I think having those opportunities to work with like it was sort of one thing leading to the next. And so I feel really fortunate and lucky that I had those opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. What advice would you have for graduate students who are maybe in a similar position where maybe they feel they've gotten closer to their research agenda? They've read books, maybe they have connections, they don't have connections. What do you think would help them fine tune and get to that? Because like you said, we're going to be here a while. You're going to be spending a lot of time. Is there any advice you'd recommend to help get to that point a little sooner or faster?
Yeah, I would say one for sure is just do the work in terms of the readings, right? So, what's the literature, what's out there, what piques your interest, and just read as much as you can, especially those first few years. And that's why, coursework is so helpful. I also think to a degree, like there's a level of like hustling that you have to do, I think, as a grad student in seeking opportunities, right? So I'm just going to put a plug in so I'm the chair of the Grassroots Community Youth Organizing for Educational Justice, SIG, through AARA. And we do host mentoring sessions like once a semester. And, we have a business meeting. And it's just these opportunities where we have scholars that we're trying to connect with, especially with emerging graduate students. And so, these special interest groups may be a really nice place for you to also, as a grad student, network and connect with scholars. So.
No, actually, I went to the one for sure. I remember I want to say San Diego.
Yeah,
And
yeah, we had a pretty good attendance. Yeah,
yeah, there was good attendance, and there were also youth there at the event able to present on some of their research and the work that they've been doing in the community.
yeah,
So that was also really nice.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into the paper. Just like our origin stories for our own careers, it's funny how a paper can have an origin story as well. It's like, where did this idea come from? How did this project come about?
Yeah,
So, what was that first seed for I
yeah.
want to do this project or this is paper that I have in mind?
hmm I had been doing a ton of reading on YPAR, and I was just so in awe of the work that had been done, right? And I'm sure we could just a laundry list of scholars that have done some amazing work around YPAR. And it always focused on just how awesome it was, which I understand, like, as in terms of participatory action research, perhaps not getting the type of respect that, maybe traditional empirical quantitative studies by a university member would. And so I was really what I was really interested in was I had just started a YPAR project for my dissertation, and it was really messy. It
Mhm.
was ugly at times, and I didn't feel like there was any scholar really being very transparent about the messiness and the ugliness of it. And so it really just started as a conversation that I had with Michelle Fine because let me see, I'd met her at Urban and then she was scheduled to come to Wisconsin for a talk. And I reached out to the organizer, was just wanting, some one on one time with Michelle. She was very gracious in doing so. And we just sat and talked. And she was like, I think you should write about it. I was like, really? And so that's kind of how it started. So it was actually very organic. And I think that I don't, it's great to see examples of YPAR in terms of its, impact on youth and communities and these issues that, that are a focus. And I also think it's important to kind of, sort of pull the curtains back and let's see what's going on behind the scenes, right? And making it transparent in terms of there's some really wonderful, powerful, and amazing parts about doing YPAR, but it's also really messy and it also can be quite ugly. So,
So when you were going through the literature, were you just like, okay, I don't feel like we're being as vulnerable or as transparent as we could be?
yeah. And
Now,
I get why. Like
yeah.
I think especially if you're like an emerging scholar or if you're trying to build your career, like, you know, why be vulnerable? Like, there's
Mhm.
no incentive in the academy to be vulnerable, right? We want to just, you know, publish, 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 do what you need to do, right? But I just felt like for myself, I didn't mind because I think it's important, especially for up and coming scholars to see like this is the reality of this work, and not no one YPAR project is the same as another, but I think we need to have these conversations, right? In terms of how YPAR can actualize in all of its messy glory, right? So,
Mhm. So did you already have these ideas in mind when you drafted up your dissertation proposal, you are submitting IRB? Did you already have these ideas of mind of a potential focus, or is it something that came about as you were moving through the process?
oof, it was definitely sort of, I think I could say it was very organic in terms of how it happened. So, also at my institution in my department, I was the second one in in terms of our department had traditionally done these monograph dissertations, and I had one other colleague who actually wrote a 3 article format
Mm,
for her dissertation, and I was like, I want to give that a try because guess what? The publishing manuscripts will be the currency in the job market.
yeah.
And because of that, I knew entering my dissertation phase that I would want to think about this work that I'm doing and think about at least 3 articles that it could translate to. And the 3rd article, this is actually from my dissertation. So it's the third piece to
Or
it.
the third.
Yeah, and it made sense because, a lot of this third piece is really like, okay, this has happened. Let's reflect on, this experience, and that ability to process and critically reflect, I think is so important as a scholar. So,
Okay, great. Would you mind sharing now a little bit about the project itself, how you were able to gain entrance and work with the young people, and what that's like setting that up from scratch?
so this is also through the work with John Diamond that he was also part of a school university partnership. And as his graduate assistant, I would sit in on meetings, and I wanted to be a part of the steering committee for this particular partnership. And one of the prongs of this partnership included developing a pipeline program for minoritized youth to become teachers. And, for myself, having been a teacher and wanting to seek opportunities to work with youth, I kind of threw my hat in the ring, was like, hey, I'd like to lead this. And so they they let me do it. And I planned a 3-week sort of summer institute with the young folks I worked with. And at the end of that experience, they wanted to study the racial disparities that were occurring in their school district, and the idea was for that year to have a year-long YPAR project where we're focusing on this particular topic. And as we know, life doesn't always go as planned. And my visions of doing this like YPAR project where young people get to be the drivers, and
Mhm.
yes, this is a racial equity oriented partnership. So of course everyone's going to be on board. And that was not the case at all. And so and I write about this as a graduate student, how like, and as a graduate student, you're not a tenured professor, so there's definitely a power dynamic and differential that you have to account for. And so when I went to my supervisors to tell them, at the university side and at the school district side, hey, this is what the young people want to study, and they're like, no, that's a bad idea, you know for lots of reasons. And one of them is, protecting the image of this school district partnership and not wanting to sacrifice any donations that, if we piss off somebody, who's a donor because we're doing this work. And so that was a really hard pill to swallow as a graduate student, and, trying to reconcile that while I'm also trying to support young people in terms of what they want to do, right? But how do you do that in this context that's very much mired in very traditional ways of looking and seeing things? And so that was really hard. And I actually am not sure if I'm answering your question. What was your question again?
No, as far as getting the project started, you did start on just the idea of like being able to work with the John Diamond, starting this pipeline for minoritized youth, the 3-week summer institute, and then you proposed for a year-long YPAR
Mhm.
project.
Yeah. Was there a second part to your question, though?
As far as how did you go about conceiving the idea? Because I'm guessing through your relations with the faculty, with this initiative, you're like, huh, maybe this could be my dissertation study.
Yeah. I think it goes back to the whole, like, hustling thing, right? Like, no one's gonna just drop this idea into your doorway, right? So it's like, I really did feel like I had to, okay, I need to put myself out there, attend these meetings, let's see what happens, and then, okay, I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring, see what people think, and for me, it was sort of as these moments are happening, it's like, okay, how can I, what can I contribute to this? And also, what is my expertise? And, could this be a good fit in terms of, yeah, I need a dissertation site.
Mhm.
This is a place that needs this particular service. Okay, can this work and can this coalesce? And so, I mean, that's really how I did it as a grad student. So
And so getting it off the ground, you seem to have support. It seemed like it was mutually beneficial for both parties and everything was good to go. Because I know sometimes people experience a lot of roadblocks, like especially working with K through 12 institutions, waiting for schools to be on board for district approval. It seemed that in this way that there was some preliminary support. I know later you talk about like roadblocking, youth
yeah,
topics or research lines and other obstacles you face. But as far as and which kinda goes back to your point of, like, how YPAR can be romanticized, and a lot of people are like, "Ooh, this is good. This is great. Actually, this will make us look great. This is perfect for the initiative that we're trying to,
mhm,
put out there." So I
yeah,
was curious, like, the temperature, so to speak, of what it was from the people around you when you wanted to get this
yeah.
project started.
Yeah, there was definitely excitement and interest, and I'm not quite sure though if the adults in the space really knew what I was doing.
Mm.
'Cause I think when we talk about, like, racial equity, right, like, I think equity gets I mean, there are so many ways that you can interpret that, right, and how it's been and just like social justice, right, how that's been, commodified or used in different ways that actually, like, your movement's talking about social justice and this movement over here is talking about like, what is it really? And so I actually think that they gave me so much license in terms of creating the curriculum for the Educators Institute, which happened in the summer, and also the YPAR project as a whole, is that I'm actually not quite sure how what's the word I'm looking for? Intensely we studied racial equity and how intensely we were working towards building a racial consciousness as a group. I'm just not sure if the adults in those spaces knew exactly what we were doing, if they would have been completely okay with it. But I think because they gave me so much creative license, I went with it.
Yes.
And so I think because of that, though, like lo and behold, this is what students actually want to study. Like they want to study how disproportionality and discipline is impacting Black and Latinx youth, in this school district, right? But that was too much for the adults in those spaces to accept and handle. And so that's one of the roadblock blocks that we had as a result. So
Do you remember what type of feedback in particular that you received as what potential effects or consequences would ensue if the youth were to continue in that line of research?
yeah, I mean, I think I got responses like, well, why? I don't understand why they have to study this. That was one. And then the other one was, I'm just not sure if, we're just not there yet as a community to be able to embrace whatever may come out of the study. So I think it was more of the fear of the unknown, right? And wanting to protect the image that they're trying to create
Mhm.
district. So
Okay.
yeah.
You talked about this in a little bit, but you said about this idea of, like, the curriculum. What are we reading? What are our activities? How is that approached?
I really wanted my students to have an opportunity to examine the root causes of educational racial inequities. So it really did mean, okay, we're going to actually read an excerpt from Beverly Tatum's book about how do you define racism, right? And then we're going to, watch this documentary about The legacy of racism in our country historically and its impact, like, for example, redlining, right? My students learned about redlining during that time and how that informs housing segregation and also educational segregation, right? Because I think my aim was, if I'm trying to prepare this next generation of minoritized educators, I want them to have this critical consciousness so they can analyze and understand why things are happening the way they are in their schools and in their neighborhoods.
Despite the title and despite the romantic notions that we've discussed that can often appear in YPAR work, there was good. You have a subsection titled The Good, Learning from Young People. So can you give us a little bit of behind the scenes of some of the positive experience, some of the pluses, the strengths of the study?
I mean, I was a high school English teacher, right? And so I do enjoy working with young people, and I think they enjoyed working with me, I believe. And so getting feedback from them in terms of what they learned from the program, and not just like content wise, right? But I think just trying to be a supportive adult in their lives was very meaningful for me. And I think also for them as well. And also just learning about the experiences that they have as minoritized youth, in this particular school district and context. And I was really moved at the levels and depths in which they would open up to me about the challenges that they faced. And I think it really just, it's really the human element of this work that I just love so much. And that's why I feel so compelled about YPAR.
There's actually a line here that you write, quote, "Graduate school alone proved a hollow existence at times. Insulated in my academic bubble, I yearned for opportunities to connect with young people again," end quote. And this actually really resonated with me because I dealt with a similar experience being as a K through 12 teacher, just because, again, I was also at a charter school in Texas. So they moved me around depending on what grade when combined classes, because everything changed every year. So I was so used to being in practice that when I first started as a PhD student, it felt like all I was doing was reading in theory. And I know that was incredibly paramount and important, but I felt a disconnect from the connection that how theory can move into practice and how practice can inform theory. And I remember discussing it with a first advisor, actually, and saying that I miss this. Like, I want to find an opportunity. Mind you, I might have been only in my first year. I want to find an opportunity or an organization to work with. And I was strongly advised and told no,
Yeah.
that you need to become a researcher now, and you can just teach another time, or you can work with us another time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you should be in my office like 40 hours a week doing research on
Mhm.
top of your coursework.
Yeah.
Was the messaging that I received.
And I think that's the model of, graduate studies, especially if you're, pursuing your PhD and trying to be an academic, right? I think there are other folks who are trying to really disrupt that image, that I don't think you have to bifurcate yourself from communities, and youth in order to be a scholar in the academy, right? Although I see the challenge of doing that if you have obligations with your coursework and you want to do this in communities, but if it nourishes your soul and buoys your spirits and grounds you, I think there's ways to go about it, right?
Yeah,
I don't think it has to be a zero sum game. So
right. I think it helped give me a why again.
Mhm.
'Cause I
Yeah.
felt 'cause sometimes, especially when you're isolated, you're doing all this stuff alone
Mhm.
in many ways, it's like, "Wait, what am I doing? What's the goal here?" Like,
Yeah, and it's such a contrast from, when we're school teachers, where you feel like surrounded by students all the time, all day for 7, 8 hours straight, and then to go from that to like, okay, you're in a cubicle sitting in the graduate student center, reading, or, I remember that feeling very jarring to me as well, and lonely, and, it was definitely hard, like, to get into that rhythm of what graduate student life is, so.
but it sounds like you were able to push through that and go, like you said, be a hustler, make contacts with people, reach out, attend the meetings. So for graduate students now who might be feeling, like, what's my why? Like, or what community am I hoping that my research on the other side of this is going to impact?
Yeah.
What advice, if any, would you share with them who, if they're feeling the same way?
Finding like peers at other institutions, like, so I didn't know a whole lot of folks at my graduate institution that was doing YPAR, right? But there were folks outside across the country that was doing this work. And so reaching out to them, I also think, and I get it, like as a graduate student, you may not feel super comfortable reaching out to a top scholar in the field that does this work, but you may be surprised at how generous some people are with their time and energy. And even if it's you're at this conference in the spring and this person's going to be presenting, maybe go to their presentation at the very end, introduce yourself or something, or reach out via email and, hey, can we get a cup of coffee? I'd love to learn more about your work. This is what I'm thinking. And I do feel fortunate that there have been a very supportive circle of scholars who have helped me along the way to as a scholar. So, and but I do think it does take some initiating perhaps. And of course not every scholar is going to be, "Oh yeah, but I do think there's a lot of really nice people who are willing to help." So,
Yeah, you don't know until you ask, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
At least email is like a low I feel like email is still a low stake, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
activity, right? For
Exactly.
rejection.
Exactly. Yeah, and and I'm definitely not like I'm not an extrovert by any means, but I do think there's a degree of like if this is what you want, you really just got to like, okay, take some risks, reach out, let's see who's around, who's willing
Right.
to connect. And so, yeah, and you just don't know, right? Unless you try. So,
Okay, good. Okay, back to the good, in the PAR project. You mentioned in the findings that the young people started reporting on various ways their awareness of social justice issues had deeply influenced and shaped them and how they wanted to share that knowledge with other people. Oftentimes, and I've written about this as well, but we there's an overemphasis on external transformation or how like it's changing policy, it's changing practice, it's changing laws, right? And sometimes these internal transformations, in this case critical consciousness or advancement of knowledge, can be overlooked.
yeah.
um, what did you notice about any small changes or micro moments you can share in regards to how the youth described their mind and how it's changed over the course of the project?
Off the top of my head, it's been how many years has it been since
Yeah.
I may not be able to pinpoint, but I did do like some extensive writing about what I feel or about capturing students' perspectives and their experiences. And I think anytime we talk about race, like we had a few white students in that group, and I know that was tough for them. But honestly, them getting exposed to this content now while you're in high school, I think they're going to be in a much better place when they eventually go into a teacher ed program and hopefully talk about this. Yeah, and I think a part of what I appreciated about that time was just giving students the space to talk about these things. Like I remember we had this one conversation about like, is it okay to tell a racist joke?
Mhm.
Right? Or is it okay for like this group of boys to like flash on each other and clown one another and say these negative things to each other because they're roasting, right? They're just engaging. And it's just it was but where do you have those opportunities or spaces as a K-12 student to really talk about these social dynamics, right? And so I think this particular institute and having carving out this time for students, I think it was a neat time for them to just talk about like the ways in which they make sense and understand these social dynamics in their lives. So because it not happened in school, I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's definitely true. Not as much opportunity in traditional schooling. Did you feel, I mean, on that topic, did you feel a sense of liberation? You said you had more creative licensing. Did you notice that with the youth as well? That maybe they felt more free or able to talk about things in a more liberated way versus some other spaces?
Yeah, I will say this, having been a K-12 teacher versus being a YPAR facilitator. There's just so many more bureaucratic obligations as a teacher, right? Between like taking attendance and grades and was everyone here? I mean, I took attendance too, just for because the supervisors needed that. But I think there is more space. It can be a liberatory space, right? Because we're not confined to like, okay, we got to take this benchmark today. Let's make sure we hit up on these standards, which I felt like I did have to do as an English teacher, right? And so there was definitely creative license. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think anyone's actually paying attention to what I was doing. So I was able to be very creative. And yeah, we're going to talk about this. Yeah, I'm going to frame it as a critical race pedagogy curriculum because this is what I think if I'm trying to generate the next generation of critical educators of color, I want them to have these dispositions. So,
Okay, good. So let's move to the bad, the tensions that surface from daily practices. You foreshadowed a little bit about how some of the white students, you're like, oh, yeah, they probably did feel a little uncomfortable
yeah.
surrounding some of the topics. How
Yeah.
did that necessarily get portrayed to you or to other students? Was it body language, verbal response?
So I know that there's some white students that had a hard time with what we are talking about because I had this anonymous feedback form that they filled out. And so I definitely saw that in the data. But I think a lot of what the bad that I talked about in the article actually refers to sort of the tensions between for you as a YPAR adult facilitator, right? Like knowing that okay, the big picture and the goal of this, but we only have 10 sessions to achieve this, right? And only this amount of time within each session. Like how do you make sure to like honor the work that your young people are doing and also the lives that they lead, the complicated tensions that they experience as teenagers because of those various contexts that they're in with what I want them to do within this YPAR space, right? And so I just remember moments where I was like, ain't nobody in the room listening to me right now. And like, what am I gonna do about it? Right? It's like,
Mhm.
how are you gonna try to lead this group when in this particular exercise if no one's paying attention? And so these were the moments where I was like, okay, man, you gotta take a step back, see what's the pulse in the room, what's going on and why, and forego maybe what you have planned or what you wanted to do because the priority should be like the well-being of the young people that you're working with.
Mhm.
And that was really hard for me, especially as a classroom teacher,
Yeah.
you know? So,
I think people probably sometimes forget how much planning and organization that goes into being a classroom teacher, how confined you are to a schedule and to the policies of who be at
yeah.
power. So it's almost like, how can you not have that a part of your positionality coming in as a first time YPI facilitator? How can
Yeah.
that not shape and inform your
Yeah.
practice? And then how can you use those tools and skills as an advantage,
Yeah.
but also not but also resist against it?
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
find those tensions in like, "I wanna do this, but maybe I should do this," within
Absolutely.
yourself? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it took a while for me to figure out like for my young folks who have spent all day sitting in classrooms, for them to come to the university and sit in the classroom and then I'm going to lecture you about field notes and it's like who the hell wants to listen to that at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, right?
Right.
And so trying to find like engaging and interactive ways for them to learn about, whatever the research topic is. That was, for me, I had to push myself in terms of that. And just like sort of negotiating moments, right? And it's like and just like as a classroom teacher, like you have this vision of this lesson plan and it's going to be great. And then there's a grenade that gets dropped, in the middle of nowhere. Like where did this come from? And then you got to address that, right? Because that's being responsive. And so and I've always just been this really structured, organized teacher and to have to like forego the structures, right, that I'm holding on to because it just doesn't make sense in that moment for the young people. And so
Mhm.
being adaptable and flexible to that was something that I had to learn. So I'm
No.
much better now. So
Right. Yeah, I feel like I'm similar as well. Like, I definitely like to have a plan, I like to have options, but what I believe is my strength is that I'll go off script.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to stick to it. I was like, I have a bunch of ideas, and maybe we'll do them, maybe not, but we'll, like, and I
Yeah.
think that's something that's also helped me is, like, don't feel like you have to be on script and stay on script. the whole time, like,
Yeah.
based on what's happening in people's lives, based on the conversations. That can be very telling if the young people are really passionate and enveloped by talking about this part. Maybe that means that's a direction we're gonna go in the research, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe, hey, maybe field notes stay you didn't think was gonna, like, be as riveting, but actually someone has an experience about this and they or now we found out that we can do field notes this way, and they're like, "Huh, I'm interested to know more about that." Right?
Yeah. Exactly. So just being open to that. And I think because there aren't like there's no manual in terms of how do you run there shouldn't be, right? How do you run
Right.
a YPAR project or YPAR group? Like because it's rooted in like supposed to be an organic experience, right? And so yeah, these are just sort of like I just kind of had to my way through it before I figured it out. So
Yeah, but similar to your point, as a grad student or early scholar who's interested in learning about YPAR and there's no manual, you're like, "Wait, but, like, what are you doing?" And that's been actually one of my complaints that when I read sometimes, it's like, "But, like, what are you doing? Like, what's like, I get it if it's moving and it's this and that, but, like, what does the day look like? What are the activities? What are the questions? Like, what does that look like in motion?"
yeah.
And sometimes that's hard to get from an academic article, right?
No, and I don't think you right? Because most of the articles are actually like, "This is what the project was about. This is the findings. This
Yeah.
is our action plan," right? And so the behind the scenes stuff is just not accounted for and, for various reasons.
So let's, move on to the ugly, the constraints of working within institutions.
Yeah,
Tell me your
much to
thoughts.
say. So one of them being involved IRB. So, well, this is also the tricky part of being a part of a school district university partnership was that we had to actually go through like a data agreement, right? In terms of because this was technically through that partnership, I didn't own the data. Like whatever data I collected, it was data that the partnership collected. And then on top of that, I happen to be at an institution that does not believe that youth under the age of 18 can collect data. And so whatever data they collected, because I had these visions of, and I've seen other YPAR scholars do this where they're like co-authoring with their youth researchers. And I thought that would be a really neat opportunity, especially for folks who want to, they want to, maybe they want to do some writing about this work. And so I I actually had like a really hard time with the IRB at my institution because they were resistant to youth as researchers and youth as writers, and so they were not trying to support me in that type of way. And I was such a troublemaker with IRB, like, they knew me by my first name there. This is a huge institution. I
Right.
had so many meetings with IRB, and so that's I think I would say advice for a graduate student is get to know your IRB in terms of how they approach youth research, because I've been at other institutions where it's like, yeah, youth can write with you. Yeah, you can collect the data that or you can write about the work with the youth about their research, but not every institution is like that. So,
And that is so interesting because literally your the whole like epistemology and rationale for doing YPAR is to validate young people's
yeah.
experiences and their capacity as
Mhm.
researchers,
Mhm.
right?
And
And
then
if
we had
you're operating within a institution and
yeah.
system that makes that completely null and contradicts it entirely. And now you have to find a way to navigate in between it.
Yeah, exactly, especially as a grad student because you gotta reconcile, like, these are the institutional constraints, right? Even though they're not something that I'm not I don't wanna adhere to that, but I have to if I wanna actually, get this dissertation written and published, right? And so it was very disappointing, right? But also just, like, these are the realities as a grad student. Like, you just don't get, like, these are the constraints and you have to work within these constraints, right?
So now looking back, you've completed this project. There's been some time and distance in between it. Looking back, and maybe it'll inform future or current YPAR projects that you'll engage in. What are some things you're like, "Ah, this time I want to do it this way. Or next time, if I would switch this, I would do this instead of that. Do you have any of those takeaways?
Yeah, so I think since my dissertation, I've led like 4 different YPAR projects, and every experience, right, like, is an opportunity to learn and to sort of rethink how I would approach these things. I will say this, I think when I was dissertating, I did feel like I had a clock, right? Like,
Mhm.
whether it was these milestones that I had to meet in terms of my dissertation, right? I was also pregnant with my daughter at the time. I like gave birth to her a week after I finished data collection. Yes.
Uh,
So I don't have those ties or constraints anymore. And so I think because of that though, like so for example, last spring I did a YPAR project with a group of high school students on mental health issues. And the vision was like, oh, it's going to be a 10-week project and ended up being like a 15-week project. And it was because it just made sense, right? So we were kind of going with the flow. Like there's that flexibility that I have as a tenured professor now in terms of, things aren't as pressing.
mhm.
Um, I will also throw it out there that for folks who are junior faculty, and you know this, Ashley, that the community engaged work that we do is a long process.
Mhm.
It's never just a short, quick, like, done kind of thing. Like, we're not coming in to mine data and then leave, but we're actually trying to like build relationships, be in community and do things with and alongside young people. And so because of that, it takes a long time, right? And so something to be mindful of as junior faculty is like, how do you make sure that you continue to publish at a rate that is going to be on track for to eventually get tenure? Um,
How
you
did
know,
you d is there certain guidelines or borders you'd put up to protect yourself of like, "Okay, like, I'm gonna do this," or, "But I'm not gonna do this," or, like, "Okay, I'm gonna do a study, but now I'm gonna go write for the next 4 or 5 months." Is there anything that helped you navigate that and, like,
no.
keeping that productive tension of, like, being a community engaged scholar, but also a scholar who's tenured track and now tenured?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that I did a lot of writing based on my data for my dissertation. So my advice is whatever data you're collecting for your dissertation, just know you're going to be writing on that for the first few years that you're on the tenure track, right? And
And
as you're
you
doing
said 3
that,
pieces came out of it?
3 and a few more.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'd
Wow.
say like 5 total maybe,
Okay.
which I think is the limit.
Okay. She
Then
got all the juice. She got all the juice.
exactly. So squeeze as much as you can out of that
Yeah.
experience. But I've also, and to be transparent, I mean, my first few years on the tenure track, I wasn't out there doing launching YPRO projects.
Right.
And so I had to think about, what are other research strands that I would have, in the meantime. And so I'm only just beginning to write about YPAR work. And I think that is a part of the tension of
Mhm.
how do you do this, especially if you don't have funding as, a junior faculty because you want to, you know, reciprocate the labor and make sure that, the folks who are doing this work with you are getting compensated for it. And so it's just so I mean, to be honest with you, the community engaged work, because it took longer, I had to also rely on other research strands of mine. So
I definitely feel that because I'm in the process now of still unpacking some pieces for my dissertation, but I'm not out there in the field leading any projects right now just because I can't.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I can't. But it's odd. It feels weird almost, and I don't know if you felt this way, when people ask, like, "Oh, like, let me know how I can support you or what projects are going on right now," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm not doing any." Like
Oh,
like,
you're
I
right.
was, but I'm not right now, but I will. Like, it's hard to
Yeah.
explain.
Yeah, it really is. But I do think, the first few years focusing on your dissertation data and just grind as much out as you can. And then from there, because community-based research takes time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely takes time. Okay, let's look at the idea of this epilogue being written by Michelle Fine, who's obviously a senior scholar in the field, who's published quite a bit about participatory research and work with young people. I know that fortunately you had the opportunity to already be in relations with her prior to inviting. So what is that conversation like of asking a senior scholar to be a part of this project, to write an epilogue? How did that idea come about?
So this was when Michelle had visited Wisconsin, and I just reached out to set up a time to talk with her. And I remember being very pregnant at the time. I was at least 32 weeks, I think.
Oh, wow.
We're sitting there and just talking. I was just kind of like, almost like confessing. I was like at confession or something. Like these are all the terrible things I've done. All the- this is how messed up things are. And Michelle was just like, "It's okay, Van. Like, first of all, you're being too hard on yourself." And she was really like, "You need to write about this." And so that was really the impetus of it, and for us to work together. I think she was just really encouraging me to write down and reflect on what I've been experiencing. So I don't if she hadn't made that suggestion, I don't think I would have thought that it was worth writing about.
Mhm.
So it was really nice of Michelle to affirm for me what I had been observing. So
And did that also give you the confidence to circle back and ask her like, "Hey, would you write a small an ending epilogue for the piece?"
yeah, no, I think actually like when she said that, she was like, we should write something, and I would take the lead, and then she would write her epilogue at the end.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
So
that's gotta feel pretty good, right? As a a grad student who's pregnant, who is, like, debating and have at confessional, right? To get these
yeah.
words. Like, this is a kind of a big moment.
Yeah, I mean, it was really I wasn't expecting it, first of all. I'm like, "That's Michelle Fine, who am I?" Right? And so but I also know that she's very generous in working and writing with junior scholars, and it was and, it's just one of those things where it's like, "And she's Michelle Fine, she didn't have to who am I?" And so but she took the time to talk with me and to open these possibilities for me, which was really nice of her, and I think moving as a scholar who's advancing in her career, like, that's I think that's a part of the work too, right? Is to pay it forward. And being nice to other scholars too. And
Right.
I do feel very fortunate that I've had such a nice circle of scholars who have supported me along the way. And I think that is just so important. So
Yeah, I'll add actually another story that I know. Dr. Julio Camarota was on my dissertation committee. He's also a mentor and now a colleague at the University of Arizona, and they both co-edited
yeah,
Revolutionizing
yeah, yeah,
Education. And he said similarly, he was like, I believe either in the grad program or about to like get a job, and she said like, "Hey, we should write. And you be first author, and
yeah,
we should do a book project."
yeah,
And that's how that came about, which is
yeah.
again a really good opportunity for
And that book's amazing, right? So, yeah, so definitely, what are the obligations of senior scholars who've been going through this? And I'm not a senior scholar at all, but like I think because of the nature of YPAR, right? Like those of us who are drawn or attracted to YPAR, there's a degree of generosity involved in terms of wanting to do this work with young people, right? And so I've found scholars who are generous with their time, to mentor me as well. So
Well, I have to add this because she writes this in the very end of the epilogue, and I think it's super special. Quote, "Carry on, Van, with your gifts and talents. Chronicle the stumbles, the barriers, the stunning moments, and fracture points where participatory research reveals the braiding of structural violence and radical possibilities. This is your gift to your baby and her generation, who will need lanterns in dark times to light the way toward liberatory practices of teaching, research, organizing, and crafting policy." How
yeah,
sweet.
beautiful. Yeah, my daughter's 7 now, so it's very sweet.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. We are coming to the end of our time together, but I did want to play a quick little game that I call In My Expert Opinion. And essentially, I'm just going to rattle off some topics that you'll be well familiar with. And you're just going to give me your hot take.
Okay.
Okay. So, number one, our youth leaders?
Absolutely. Do you want me to elaborate?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
I think young people, unlike adults, they're not constrained to whatever obligations that we feel to certain entities because of our jobs or because of I just think young people, they are absolutely leaders. They have ideas and opinions and voices that should and deserve to be heard.
Okay, good, thank you. Number 2, where do you think YPAR is best conducted? What type of spaces do you feel YPAR is
Mhm.
best suited to?
I mean, I think spaces where the adults in the context are supportive or will get out of the way, who will provide resources and whatever scaffolding is necessary or needed. And I've seen this happen maybe more readily in like out of school contexts, but I don't think that means that it can't happen in school context. I just know that there's a lot more aspects to contend with, right, in the traditional school setting. So
Mhm. What do you think about YPAR projects that are more homogeneous of one certain race or background, or more heterogeneous in multiple different racial backgrounds, being those representing dominant society or those being from more minoritized groups? What, based on now the experience of navigating, it looks like up to maybe 5 or more YPAR studies and projects, do you notice a difference of what that's like if it, for instance, if all the young people are BIPOC, or if it's mixed,
Mhm.
or if they're all Black or all Asian, or y teasing out those racial
Yeah. I
complexities
mean,
a little
yeah,
bit.
I think there's value in, well, first of all, why do we have certain spaces that are homogeneous, right? So, I mean, if we're doing YPAR in certain communities, communities are segregated. So, lo and behold, schools are segregated. So that's bound to happen. Although I see the value in, like, yeah, like the Latinx students at this school see this issue. Yeah, why not? I also see the value in a mixed BIPOC setting where there's potential for like learning from one another, seeing our solidarities, right, as minoritized groups, and also acknowledging differences and experiences, right, as racialized beings. I'm less familiar with, though, like affluent white kids being in YPAR projects with. Maybe that does happen, but I just haven't seen it as much. I also know that I think if we think about like the origins or genesis of participatory action research, I mean it's minoritized, marginalized folks organizing and doing research, right? Not necessarily with dominant groups, although I can see the benefit of a mixed race economic setting too. So
Okay, nice.
yeah.
Okay, you mentioned this a little bit about the time of a YPAR project. And I think for your dissertation, you set forth for the year, and then earlier, I know you mentioned another project where you did from 10 to 15, 10 originally, and then you expanded to 15 sessions. What would you say is like the minimum amount of sessions or time or meetings that you would need to complete from beginning to end or a YPAR project?
Man, that's a really good question. I think it would depend on like the age of the group, how many students are in the group,
Mhm.
often do y'all get to meet. So I don't know if I have a magic number to tell you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it just really depends.
So for your dissertation study, for instance, did you feel like the year was ample time? You felt very comfortable with that amount of time and that with that age group and as well?
Yeah, I think that was ample time to address the research topic that we wanted to address, but I could see if the topic's like more of a longitudinal study or something that it would definitely more than a year. I mean, honestly, most of these projects I wish I had more time. I think
Mhm.
that's usually the issue. So I think when graduate students are thinking about planning a YPAR project, more plan for more time if you can, right? So plan for those extra weeks because whatever you think you're gonna do, you're probably not. So
And do you think on that note, do you think meeting once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks is there any
yeah.
form like meeting schedule that you like or prefer?
And just my own preference. I usually meet once a week with my YPAR group just because I think 2 weeks feels like there's too much time apart. And I think there's like a rhythm to a project, and also just continuity, and in terms of building like community and having just that regular weekly meeting. That's that works for me. So
You feel good about that. Okay.
yeah.
And then lastly, for graduate students or scholars who maybe they've never heard of YPAR, maybe they're interested in it, where would you offer them as a good place to start to go learn more about it?
Yeah, so I have 2 recommendations. One, definitely the Revolutionizing Education that Camarota and Fine co-edited. There's also a website called YPAR Hub out of Berkeley. So I think it's yparhub.berkeley.edu that Emily Ozer runs. And so I think that's a really good website with lots of resources, and you can see different YPAR projects that have happened. So
Okay, perfect. Thank
yeah.
you so much, Dr. Van Leck, for coming on. Please tell
Yeah.
listeners where they can find you or how they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, sure. So I am on Twitter, I think formerly known as Twitter, now X, Dr. Dr. Underscore Van Lack. Yeah, that's one way that you can reach me, or via email at lack@uic.edu. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for being a guest on Willing to Learn.
awesome. Thank you.